Now let us come to one more value of the Indian Constitution, that is liberty. The liberty concept comes from many political writers or political philosophers of France and England. Now, the most important revolution, democratic revolution in the history of the world, is considered to be the French Revolution. The other revolution, which is equally important, is the American War of Independence. American War of Independence happens in 1776 and your French Revolution happens in 1789. Within 13 years of the American War of Independence, the French Revolution comes. And India's struggle for freedom, which starts from 1857 and goes up to 1947, is the most important struggle as far as India is concerned. Now, when the American War of Independence came in 1776 and the French Revolution came in 1789, liberty, equality, fraternity became the three most important principles of these two great revolutions. The French Revolution declared that it has three objectives, that is liberty, equality and fraternity. Now, let us try to fraternity, we will defer it because fraternity is also a value of the Indian Constitution which we will discuss little later. Now, let us first discuss liberty. Now, the French society prior to the Great Revolution of 1789 had a monarchy. It was a monarchical government. Not only monarchical government, most of the offices were based on birth. Even military positions were by birth. That means, if your father is a military officer, the son will automatically become a military officer. Whether he is qualified for it, whether he has the qualities of becoming a great soldier, of leading an army or not, was not the consideration. That was the system, feudal system. And people had no freedom, they had no liberty. Because of the feudal character of the society, a farmer's son was practically forced to be a farmer, nothing else. Education was there, but it was very restrictive. People could not go get education easily. So, people lacked freedom, people lacked liberty to do what they wanted to do or even to think what they wanted to think. And a feudal society, a medieval feudal society, controlled the minds and bodies of the people. And this was quite stifling, particularly control over the mind. So, I will not go into great details of the French Revolution, but what was the importance of liberty can be simply understood that when the French Revolution succeeded and America Revolution was going on, though it started, the War of Independence started in 1776, till America became a republic, till a system of governance came up, till a constitution was written, we find that the struggle for democracy continued. And the people of France gifted the Statue of Liberty to United States of America. If you go to New York today, there is a huge Statue of Liberty. Now, in our India, Sardar Bhai Patel statue in Gujarat is taller than the Statue of Liberty. Statue of Liberty was the tallest statue in the world for many years. It was gifted by the people of France to United States, people of United States. Why? Because they were comrades in their struggle for liberty, in their struggle for fraternity, in their struggle for justice, in their struggle for equality, or in a single word, for modern democracy as we understand today. That is how, that gives us an idea, that makes us understand how the revolutionaries of France and America valued liberty as the most important feature of modern democracy. When French people gifted it, it is still there. If you by chance go to United States of America, via New York, America is a very big country, if you go to New York, you will see how the Statue of Liberty dominates the gateway to America. Of course, today you can see the Statue of Liberty through internet. You can go through a virtual visit. I will advise you seriously to visit the virtually the Statue of Liberty. So, liberty has come to symbolize, signify modern democracy. And these were the values of American War of Independence, the French Revolution. Similarly, the great struggle for freedom in India was also inspired greatly by the freedom struggle, by the revolution in these two countries. The slogan of America, just like in France, liberty, fraternity, equality, justice, all these were their symbols or slogans. America's slogan was that no taxation without representation. America was under England, it was a colony of United Kingdom, and they were not getting elected to the Parliament of England. Though England was governing them, they were not getting elected to the Parliament of England. So, that is why they said no taxation without representation. Why should you tax us when we are not there in your Parliament? When we have no say in the governance of our governance, we the people of America should govern America. Why England will govern America? We may have come from England. Americans came from England, quite a large number of them, but there were also local people, there were also African slaves, there were also people from Holland, Portugal and several other countries, and also from China and later from India and many other countries. America is a cauldron of races. So many people from all over the world have gone and made America their own country. So, when the revolution started, their single agenda was that we must have a representative government. That is a democracy. That is a democracy. That is what they wanted. That is why there was a revolution. Now, in India, what we wanted? From 1857 to 1947, what is the single mantra of the people of India? That we will want to govern ourselves. People of England has no right to govern us. Lokmanya Tilak said, Swaraj is my birthright. Swaraj is my birthright. You are there in us, governing us. We want you to go out. Why? Not because whether you are governing us well or you are not governing us badly. Tilak's argument, or for that matter many freedom fighters' argument, is that England should not govern us. Why England should not govern us? Because governing us is our own fundamental right. To govern yourself, to govern ourselves is our right. Whether England is good or bad is not the issue. The issue is that they are outsiders and they have no right to rule over us. Now, when you look into the American War of Independence, the same argument. America must be governed by Americans, not by people from England. It cannot be controlled from London. It cannot be governed from London. So, you leave. In France, it was slightly different. In France, they were saying that there should be a democratic, elected people must rule as representative people, no monarchy, no feudal rights, no birthright. So, we wanted democracy. But Indians also wanted a democracy, Americans also wanted a democracy. So, there are two principles. One is the right to self-determination or the right to govern yourself. The second right is that how can you exercise that right? You can rule yourself through representatives. So, in France also they were saying the same thing. Right to governance is not vested in the king, that is vested in the people. That is why king must go, monarchy must go, and democracy should come. So, all these three, whether it is American War of Independence, whether it is the French Revolution, whether it is the Indian freedom struggle, the common strand or common thread, what is common to all three great revolutions is right to govern yourself or democracy. So, liberty was the catchword, was the essential philosophy which inspired all the three countries. Liberty is our cornerstone. That is why when the constitution makers thought of values and all that, they included liberty in the very preamble. So, liberty was the guiding principle of the French Revolution, American Revolution and India's struggle for freedom. Liberty in the Indian context does not mean mere absence of restraint or domination. it has a little wider meaning, because in 1940 monarchy was in parts of India, monarchy was not everywhere, monarchy was not everywhere. And I have already talked how India was a country of various religions, various economic levels of living, standards of living, so many discriminations. I have already talked of unity in diversity and so many other things of features of Indian freedom struggle and the Indian people. So, it is not always that you can say all three are equal, French Revolution, Indian freedom struggle and American Revolution. First of all, there is a difference in time, that is in 18th century, ours is basically on late 19th century and 20th century. It is 100 years, 50 years from 19th century, another 50 years from 20th century, second half of 19th century to second half of first half of 20th century. That is the roughly 99 years of our freedom struggle, 100 years you can say, 90 years to 100 years, so whatever it is. So, we have to, concept of liberty has to be understood to an extent in Indian context, in the context of our own freedom struggle. Certain minimum rights are to be enjoyed by every person in a community for free and civilized existence in the civil society. Let me first read out the PPT, then we will go one by one. Liberty of the individual must be subject to social control in order to protect the collective interest of the community and for prevention of antisocial activities. With the adoption of the Constitution of India, fundamental rights, liberty of the citizens have been guaranteed, made justiciable, and no encroachment on these rights by the legislature or executive could be lawfully defended. So, this is the concept of liberty. You must read the text also, because in the class it is not always possible to exhaust the entire text which is there in your book, which can be downloaded free of cost from the website of the Government of Odisha, Higher Education Department website. You can download the entire course material freely, there is no problem, and also to listen our lectures. But before listening these lectures, I will strictly advise you read the text, then come to the class, then you will understand it much better, not the reverse. Do not attend the class first, then read and then attend the class, that is very important. Now, let us try to understand. First, I have explained to you that the concept of liberty comes from the great French Revolution, the great American War of Independence, and it is symbolized by the Statue of Liberty gifted by France to America, which is standing at New York port. When you enter America by waterways, it stands very tall. It is a symbolic thing. So, liberty, and then of course, in England also, John Stuart Mill, J.S. Mill is considered to be the father or the guru of liberty. He wrote a book in the name of liberty. It is a very important book, Liberty, by the name Liberty. You find one of the utilitarian philosophers, John Stuart Mill, who is also considered to be a great democratic philosopher of the world. He wrote a book, Liberty in England, and try to find out what is the summary of liberty from Wikipedia, from Britannica Encyclopedia or Americana Encyclopedia or Grolier Encyclopedia. You can go to any one of these great encyclopedias and find out what is the meaning of liberty, how the concept of liberty grew in the world context. So, this philosophy comes by 18th century, beginning of the 18th century, from John Stuart Mill, but he was preceded by his father James Mill, and he was preceded by Bentham, Jeremy Bentham, a great political philosopher of England. All these three philosophers, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill and his father James Mill, all have written extensively on the ideology of democracy and on the concept of liberty, freedom, equality. All these concepts have been written about, and all these are called the democratic philosophers. And in France, we have Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu. Voltaire, Rousseau and Montesquieu. In America, we have Jefferson and others also. So, from all these thinkers of the late 18th century and early 19th century, we find that concept of liberty was growing greatly. And in India, Lokmanya Tilak wrote, Mahatma Gandhi wrote, Aurobindo Ghosh wrote, your Sardar Patel Bhai wrote, and Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, all these great freedom fighters of India, many of them were also thinkers. Most of them, quite a large number of them were prolific writers, and they have also extensively written on what is liberty. The foremost liberty is the liberty to self-determination. Decide how your government will run, who will govern ourselves, how we will be governed, all these things is our fundamental liberty. And none of these democratic philosophers support the idea of monarchy, support the idea of governance by birth, governing rights of governance by birth, or any office by birth, and none of them wanted to perpetuate the rights of the rich, none of them wanted the poor to be exploited, everybody wanted in welfare, they wanted that all the citizens' welfare must be ensured by a constitutional mechanism, by a democratic government. So, this is the broad outlook of a liberty. And then in England it started from a very small thing. In the early 13th century, around 1215 if I remember correctly, but you verify, a document was issued, the king was forced to issue a document that is known as the Magna Carta. Magna Carta. So, magnum opus, magna means the big, and carta is charter. And what is there in this charter? The King of England agreed that nobody shall be arrested without a warrant, and nobody can be sent to jail without the order of a magistrate. So, even today in India, if somebody is arrested, he is to be produced before a magistrate, then only he can be sent to jail under law. Previously what was happening when monarchy was there, when other non-democratic governments were there, in the sweet will of the ruler, anybody could be arrested and put behind bars. And sometimes he can be killed also without any fair trial, without giving an opportunity to him to defend himself. Is that liberty? No. It is not individual liberty. Individual liberty will ensure that there is a due process of law. There is a due process of law. Nobody can arrest you like this. You cannot be punished without a trial, fair trial, not only a trial but a fair trial. No, these things were unheard before democracy, modern democracy. The government, the state thought that it is absolute power, the individual has no liberty. The individual has no freedom, no liberty. So, when we talk of liberty, we talk of self-determination, right to govern ourselves and to decide what form of government we will have, who will govern us, these come out of our liberty. There are various kinds of liberty, individual liberty, liberty of the nation as a whole, and all that. So, liberty in the Indian context has to be understood in terms of absence of restraint or domination by one group or domination by one person or a group or a person. So, that is what is concept of liberty in Indian context. Certain minimum rights are to be enjoyed by every person in the community for free and civilized existence of the civil society. I have already discussed, we have already discussed the concept of fundamental rights. We have already discussed say minimum wages. Nobody can be paid wages below certain level. We have discussed how right to housing is being gradually ensured by the governments in India. Governments, because both central and state, municipality, everybody comes in. Government is not singular in India. So, the liberty of the individual must be subject to. Now, we have already talked of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of practicing any religion, freedom to pursue education, all this freedom, or freedom of movement anywhere in India. All these we have already discussed. So, that is what is to be guaranteed in the Indian constitution. And we have also discussed that for the reasonable restriction can be imposed for the good of the society. that you are free, freedom of speech is there, but you have to ensure that your speech does not create communal disharmony. It does not disturb the peace of the society. That is very important. But please remember, whenever you have a liberty, whenever you have a freedom, you have a duty. What is that duty? Reciprocal duty. What is reciprocal duty? So, if I have a right to speak whatever I want, that means others have also a right to speak. That means I have a responsibility of facilitating others to also speak. My liberty does not mean that your liberty will be curtailed. So, if I have a right to life, if I have the liberty to live, it is my responsibility also to allow you to live. That means I must not kill. Just like nobody should kill you, you have a right to life, you have a liberty of living. Similarly, you have to respect liberty of life of others. Then only liberty has meaning. If I think that I have liberty and you do not have liberty, then there is no liberty for either you or me. So, every liberty has two things. You have to constantly remember that others have the same liberty. Others have the same liberty. You have a responsibility of not only enjoying your liberty, but a responsibility of ensuring that others enjoy their liberty. And how can this happen? So, if exercising my liberty hampers or restricts your liberty, then the government must restrict me. Reasonable restriction must be imposed. Say suppose the Hindus have a right to take out a procession during Dasara, and the Muslims living in that area, they must allow the Hindus to take the procession of Dasara. And when some festival of the Muslims come in, Muharram comes in, Tajiyas are taken out by Muslims. So, automatically Hindus of that area has a responsibility of allowing the Tajiyas to pass through the street. So, if the Hindus do not want to recognize the liberty of the Muslims, how can the liberty of the Muslims will be ensured by the Hindus? So, every right, every liberty in fact always imposes a reasonable restriction on us. It always imposes a duty on us. What is that duty? I enjoy my liberty, I ensure that you also enjoy your liberty. Then only liberty can be enjoyed by both. Otherwise, democracy shall fail. There cannot be any democracy. So, that is why Indian constitution thinks of freedom. So, when you say, if I say that you have a right to practice any religion, it is all right, I can practice. How can I practice if you do not allow the Dasara procession to pass? How can I allow if you do not give me the liberty to this? But suppose I am passing through in front of a hospital, there are aged patients, should I use microphones, 20 microphones, big sound boxes, people cannot sleep? Am I not restraining his liberty to sleep? Has he no right to sleep in the night? He has a right. That means it imposes a responsibility on me that I will reduce the sound, volume of sound. I will allow the old fellow to sleep. Is it not? So, that is a very difficult walk. It is a tightrope walk. The single principle is that my liberty is to be respected by the government. I have to respect reasonable restrictions. Now, COVID was going on. You can, for a marriage procession, Bharat procession can take place. Now, when a Bharat procession can take, it is your liberty. You are going to marry. But can you impose a restriction? Now, if you are going through the main road during the busy hour, if the traffic gets jammed, then will the police not come in? Will they not impose restriction? During COVID time we had to restrict the Bharat to 30 people. Sometimes no Bharat was allowed. You have to invite only 100 guests. You have a right to feed people. You are at liberty to feed people for your marriage. But if COVID is spreading, is the government not does he not have power to impose a reasonable restriction? It has power to impose a reasonable restriction. But if you are not satisfied with that reasonable restriction, you can go to the court and court will tell you what is a reasonable restriction. So, any amount of freedom, any amount of liberty cannot be unlimited, and every liberty, to enjoy every liberty, you must constantly remember that others have the same liberty. So, it is in the collective interest of the community, it is in our individual interest, we enjoy our liberty and we respect the liberty of others. Otherwise, anti-social elements will take advantage. No, say Rath Yatra is there, thousands of people are there, pickpocketing is happening. Should we allow the anti-social elements criminals to take advantage of it? No, you must not do that. With the adoption of the Constitution of India, fundamental rights, I have already discussed fundamental right time and again, liberty of the citizens have been guaranteed and made justiciable. That means you can go to the court of law, and encroachment on these rights by the legislature or the executive would be lawfully defended. How? This is a concept which you have not dealt so far, that neither the executive nor the legislature can impose a law where your liberty is curtailed, which is not reasonable. Suppose you are exchanging WhatsApp messages. Should the normally government read your WhatsApp messages? No, it should not. But suppose you are spreading falsehood, you are spreading communal hatred, then what happens? Government has passed a law, it can approach the WhatsApp people and ask him to share the WhatsApp messages with them. Suppose it wants, you are a criminal, you have used WhatsApp to conduct criminal activities, to spread hatred amongst the people, to all these things, then what happens? Suppose for money laundering you have used tutoring, you have used any other social media. Social media, you are at liberty to use social media. But if you engage in a restriction, then it becomes a justifiable restriction. And what kind of restriction? Only if the government has a prima facie evidence that you are using it for criminal purpose, then only it can interfere and take the messages from WhatsApp. You know, recently there was a software, Pegasus software, where the software from Israel allows the government to listen to anybody's telephone conversation, this and that. And there is a huge argument, halla gulla all over the world, that governments have used this software to spy on the leaders of the opposition, leadership of the opposition leaders. No, if that is done, if the government has purchased that, government is watching over the leaders of the opposition, then it is not a good thing. That is encroaching upon the liberty of people. It is encroaching of the liberty of the people. Similarly, if you are in bedroom with your spouse and government will fix a camera there, does the government has a right over what happens within my closed door? No. But suppose my wife says that my husband beats me and goes to the, she can go to the court of law. She can go to the police to lodge a complaint. But that does not mean government will fix a camera in your bedroom. So, reasonable restriction and unreasonable restriction. Neither the executive nor the legislature. The legislature cannot also pass a law. The parliament or the state legislative assembly cannot pass a law which will curtail your liberty, individual liberty. If it passes such a law, then the citizen can go to the court of law and it will be decided whether it is a reasonable restriction or an unreasonable restriction. That is very important. So, we must understand the value of liberty and we must understand how to respect the liberty of all, not only of ourselves but others. We must understand the concept of reasonable restriction. We must understand that liberty cannot be misutilized for the causing harm to people. So, these are the concepts. But if and when government restricts our liberty or anti-social elements or criminals restrict your liberty, and if you keep quiet, if you do not resist, if you do not raise your voice, what will happen? Democracy itself will be threatened. Democracy itself will be threatened. A dictatorial form of government will come at all cost. Dear students, at all cost. If you are a citizen in a democratic country, you must very vigorously guard your own liberty. If you do not guard your own liberty, then liberty will be lost. Democracy will lose its meaning. Republic will lose its meaning. All these values which we have discussed so far, it will have no meaning at all. Liberty is the key to a democratic government, a democratic society. We will discuss this further, other things partly in Odia, and then we will go to equality. Thank you very much.